Okay, so just please do raise your hand if you can, or just give me a thumb up, a green check mark, or a red X if you've ever come across GitHub, and whether you have used GitHub in the past. If you have used GitHub, give me a green check mark. If you have not, give me a big X. A thumb up also comes up. All right, there we go. People have used GitHub before, and that is helpful for me to understand, because what you're seeing right now is actually a part of a GitHub called the wiki, and this is where we put our notes. This is where you can put your notes, but this lesson is going to take a step back a little bit, and is going to introduce people to the idea of Git and GitHub and why they came around. So if you were to scroll down here a little bit, you're going to notice this little comic. And I like to go back to this comic quite a lot because we have all been there. We have all named our files revision_2 and comments_3. And then it builds up and it continues and it gets larger and larger as back and forth between you and your professor or you and your reviewer exchange documents. So imagine yourself having to do this for code, and it is not impossible that you use the same methodology where you just name one piece of code review_2, review_3, but this is something that has been tackled in the past. And around 2005, a project called Git came to fruition, and Git allows coders to actually do something called version control. And we're going to talk about version control a little bit later down the line, but what version control allows coders to do is to control different versions of the same software. Let's just say that I have written my essay, a single page essay, and turn it in for revision, and the reviewer just wants to add just a little bit right under the introduction. I don't want the reviewer to add onto the paper itself. I would like for the reviewer to add a little bit under the introduction in a separate document, and that is what allows that is what version control allows you to do. It adds a little bit of an extra topic onto a separate branch, and that is, we're going to be talking about branch later. And eventually, in the end, we're going to be merging everything together. What this allows you to do is to prevent the same main document to just become what you're seeing here in the comic. So without further ado, this can be a little bit confusing, but without further ado, we're going to take a step back and look at what GitHub is and how it works. So I have a little bit of a comment here where we have all been in this situation where we want to look at code and then we click around and then eventually a number of links bring us to someone's GitHub page or somebody's Stack Overflow comments. And all of these can help us save our own code. But what is GitHub? I remember when I was during my first days of being a graduate student, I would look at these pages and not understand how I can access the code. How can I download the code? So what we're going to be looking at today is how we're going to navigate GitHub. We're going to learn about GitHub's features. Over here, I have a little bit of an agenda. Excuse me, I'm moving a couple of windows around. But first, we're going to look at the difference between Git and GitHub. And then we're going to look into a number of the GitHub features, such as what's in the interface and how you can add your own code, what a repository is, how to look at your history, looking at forks, pull requests, and issues. I maybe too quickly discussed what version control is, and that was a little bit confusing. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail and give you more images, perhaps, that can help you understand how version control works. And we're also going to create our own branches. And if we do have time, I would like to invite you to go to Git on your own computer and how to connect it to GitHub. Because yes, Git and GitHub are almost the same thing, but they're two separate entities. Okay, we are recording, and I'm going to be sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, all right, fantastic. Okay, apologies for that. I was going over what the difference between Git and GitHub were. And I will say that this little infographics does a really good job at showing the differences. Git was first introduced in 2005 as a software that allows you to, as a software that allows users to make changes and add versions to their code, as well as allowing you to make changes to your code on a different branch, but all of these changes will have to be local. All of these changes will have to be local and all accessible through the shell. A group of people then created GitHub, which was later launched in 2008. And their main focus was to take Git and put it on the internet so that, well, I can work with my collaborator that's further away than just being next to me or is not using my computer. So they were going to take Git's functionalities and allow for all of these functionalities to be shared online. And this allowed a number of files and collaborations to grow online. It was later on bought by Microsoft in 2018 as they saw massive potential where somebody in Italy, for example, could collaborate with somebody in Japan and they didn't have to use the same computer. Not everyone here is a tech-savvy person, so they came up with a desktop application, which I'm not a big fan of, but at the same time, it can really help people to use Git and GitHub. The bottom line of this is that Git is local. All of the changes that you make are on a single computer, whilst GitHub allows you to take all of these changes and reflect them online so that other people online can see the various versions of your software, the various branches of your software, and download any of the changes and work on the code themselves. So the next part that I would like to discuss about is the GitHub interface. So let's go and I'm going to open up a new tab and go to GitHub myself. You can use these notes to guide yourself through the lesson. So all of these notes are not going to change and you can go back and refer to them whenever necessary. But I would like for you to go to github.com and so you can see a little bit what it looks like. Here is the landing page of GitHub, and the landing page of GitHub has a number of, excuse me, just a second, I need a second display here, so this will help me figure out where I am. Let me see what you guys can see. You guys should still be able to see the GitHub dashboard. So fantastic. You keep on looking at that. And what I wanted to say is this is the dashboard itself. This is where you first land when you sign up to GitHub and you open it up. Well, what do you see? These are very social media-like features. You can look at your home, and these are essentially feeds from people that have worked on codes that you have starred. Starred is essentially following someone's repository or following someone's account. You can see that my collaborator, Travis Simmons, has started a repository, and I can myself go and see what this repository is about. Professor Kevin Andrikaitis down at the Tree Ring Lab has started a different repository, and I can do the same. But these are more social media-like features that honestly are not the strong forte of GitHub. So I suggest to look at the top right of your dashboard, and this is where things happen. This is where you can, for example, create with a big plus over here, create a new repository, import someone's repository, create something called a code space, but we're not going to go into this so far. Today we're going to walk through what the repository is, how to create one. There also are issues, a button that brings you directly to issues that you may be following, a button that brings you to pull requests, and we're going to cover this in a second. And here on the left, you have the general menu that shows you almost exactly what's going on the right, maybe in a little bit more menu-like form. But for right now, I would like for you to click on your icon, which is the top right button over here, and see your profile. So if you click on the top right, you should be able to click on your profile. And this brings you to, well, your profile. I prefer if this would be the landing page, because all of a sudden I can see what I do. And what is it that you see? Well, you see what your quote unquote popular repositories are, and these are repositories that you created yourself. You can also see how many contributions you have made over the past year or not, and each single one of these green little blocks becomes darker and darker the more contributions you do on that specific day. This is their way of saying, hey, work more, and you have that little release of endorphins in your head that says, oh, good job, Michele, you have made a little bit of a contribution today. So here you can add a number of other social media like features, such as your description, your profile picture, anything that you would like to add. See your achievements, what part of organizations you can see, or what organizations you're part of. But this is not what we are going to focus on. What we want to do is how to read a specific repository. So for example, if I were to open someone else's repository, and let's look at this one right here, Oracle Fleur IR, we can see that there are files here, and there are a number of features that we want to know about. For example, over here we have issues, pull requests, actions, and on more popular repositories, issues are what here we have 0 issues, but issues are what people would use in order to mention problems or request features, whilst pull requests are where people try to put their own coding ideas, their own blocks of code onto your code. They won't be allowed to commit directly to your repository, but they will be allowed to ask. And that's what a pull request is, asking you to add a little bit of your code, of their code to your repository. There is a process to it. First, you need to fork a repository and then create a pull request, which we will be covering in a second. So this is a repository. This is what a repository looks like. And if you scroll down, you are going to see the README. And the README is essentially what allows a person to know what the repository is about, what the system requirements are there, how to run the code, things that you need to know before entering or before touching someone's code. So how do you create your own repository? To create your own repository, there are 2 ways, and I'm going to go back to my landing page, my own account page. And you can either, I don't see it right now, go to repositories and click the new button, or go up here on the big plus sign and click new repository. That is up to you how you want to do it. For me right now, I'm going to click new, big green button called new, and it is going to open the create new repository page. Here you have the opportunity to create, to add a name to your repository, add a README, and make sure that it has a license. We're also able to choose whether our repository is public or private. And for right now, I want mine to be public. I want to have a README, and it is really important for me to have a README because when I have a README, the repository structure is automatically created in GitHub. If I do not add a README, then I will have to create it later, which is confusing if you are a first-time user. So I decided this for it to be public and add a README. And for repository name, I'm just going to call it Tapas. And I'm gonna do, let's say, Git. It's going to check whether this name is available, and it usually is. And I'm not going to add anything else for now. I'm just going to click create repository. And boom, this is what a newly created repository with nothing in it looks like. So here we have the README file. And as I mentioned earlier, the README file is what allows people to know what the repository is about. One of the first things that I want to do is to make sure that the README files reflect exactly what the repository is. So how do I modify this README file? Well, if you hover over it, you can see that this turns into blue, and I can click it. This brings me into one of the newer GitHub features, which is you can see the list of files on the left, and on the right, you can actually edit your file if you click on this little pencil. And I can go ahead and create it, and click it. And I can say, I'm going to delete this, make it a little bit better looking data tapas, Git lesson. And you notice here on the left, there is a big pound sign and or hashtag sign, however you want to call it. This is part of the Markdown language because GitHub works through the Markdown language. And if you do not know what the Markdown language is, the Markdown language is a lightweight markup language for creating formatting text using a plain text editor. This is then rendered on the website, such as something being a title or a subtitle. For example, if I were not to add the pound sign here and say this is just a line, and look at the preview, you can see that this is big, whilst this is just a line. And if you want to know a little bit more about Markdown, in the notes themselves, we do have a link to the Markdown guide, which is essentially a cheat sheet that helps you with understanding how to format things in Markdown. And I'm going to paste it in the chat. So I can modify this file however I want. Right here, I added just a line, but I'm going to add a couple of more Markdown-like lines, such as this is a subtitle. Or if I add to a text between two asterisks, this is going to be italic. And lastly, for example, if I add two asterisk signs on each side, this is going to be in bold. I can preview my changes and I can see that, well, this with a single pound sign now became the title. This is a subtitle with a couple of pound signs, and then each single one follows along with the various markdown changes that I was telling it to do. Not going to lie, markdown takes a little bit to learn, but this is essentially the most friendly internet language that you can go out there and get accustomed to, because GitHub works like this. If you go to what do you call it, Stack Overflow, you also should know a little bit of Markdown language. So if you are new to data science, Markdown is an essential piece of information that you should know about. So I'm going to commit my changes, and committing means saving your changes. So I'm going to click this blue button that says commit changes. And here I'm going to add a description that describes better, other than updated README, what I have done. I have added markdown formatted text. And as you can see here, it asks me that it gives me an option. I can commit directly to the main branch, or I can create a new branch. Right now, I'm going to commit directly to the main branch. And since I am the one that owns this repository, it's not going to ask me, it's not going to complain. And if I were to go back to my repository, you can see now that right here, it has changed to reflect what the README looks like. So far, we have modified a single piece of file that already exists. But then the question becomes, how can I add more files? Well, there is this code button right here that says add file. And if you click on it, you can see that you can either create a new file or upload files from your computer. We're going to create a new file just by clicking the create new file here. And I wanted to catch two birds with one stone. The first thing that I want to add is a folder. So I'm just going to say folder name. Actually, I'm just gonna say folder name. And then here, for me to tell it that I want the folder, I'm going to add a slash. And a slash separates, well, a slash creates a directory. It allows you to create a directory. And then if I want to create a file, I can just say file.txt or file.md, md standing for markdown. And then I can go ahead and add to the file itself. And as you can see, the folder name folder is still there. Now that I think about it, I should probably name it something else. So I'm just going to say git data tapas tutorial slash file.md. This, I'm going to say in Markdown, I'm going to say this is the title. This is the file within the folder. Welcome. I'm not going to add too much to it. This simply because this is just an example of how you can add a specific file within a folder. So I'm just going to, again, commit my changes and say created folder and file within folder. Then I'm going to go ahead and create and commit my changes. If we were to look at the file tree, now you can actually see that I have created my folder and the file within it, whilst outside of it, I still have the README. This is new for me. So, I remember not having the little expandable menu, so it is quite welcome. And so, excuse me, just looking at my notes right now. Can I get the check-in form? Yes, you can get the check-in form. I am going to send, just give me a second. I'm going to share it with you. All right. Here you go. Gonna go back over here. Okay, excuse me about that. Okay, so we have modified a file, created a folder, and added a new file. Fantastic. But how do I know what I have done so far? There has been this talk about, wow, GitHub is so good. It can allow you to see the history. But how do I see that? Well, here on the right, you have this little clock icon. And if you were to click on that, it shows you the entire commit history down to when it was added and the time. If you were to then click on one of these, it shows you what was added and also what was removed. Here on the left is the line that I have removed. It's shown in red. And here on the right is the lines that I have added over time. I added 9 lines that explain a little bit, sorry, that show, sorry. Here on the right, you can see the lines that I have added shown in green. And you can do this for every single commit that you do. And that is something that Git doesn't do, but GitHub does very extremely well. So if you're ever lost or want to go back to a specific file, you can always go and see your entire history. Earlier, I talked a little bit about forks, pull requests, and issues. So I'm going to look at them as quickly as possible. And if I were to look at issues, well, this seems like a normal page where I can create a new issue. And it very much is that. You can create a new issue and discuss with a title, for example, what is this repository about? And there is a mistake here. Repository about. And I can create a new issue. I'm not going to add anything to the description, but if this was your first time seeing an issue, and let's assume that somebody else has raised this issue, you will have a little pop-up that says, hey, somebody has raised an issue. So I can click on that little issue button and see what the person is asking. And in this specific case, there is no description, but you can go ahead and try to comment. This is a repository that tells the data Tapas attendees about GitHub. And I can go ahead and add a comment or close this issue with that comment. And when you close an issue, that means that essentially you have reached the answer that you needed to, that this person wanted. But in the beginning, when I first closed my first issue, I was like, oh my God, if I close an issue, can I reopen it? Yes. If, for example, if this was a bug and you close the issue, but then the bug still persists, you can reopen this issue and later on discuss further what the bug is about. And then what if someone else wanted to add to my code? Well, we talked a little bit about pull requests earlier, and pull requests are these changes that you can make to your code that come from someone else's forked repository. Right now, I'm not able to show you exactly what a fork is, but for example, sorry, I cannot show you what a fork of this repository is, but for example, if we look for pandas, and I want to look at the pandas Git repository, I can create a fork by going to code. Excuse me a second. I remember that it was, I remember it being somewhere else. There it is. You can create a fork. And what a fork will do is that it is going to create exactly a copy of the repository, in this specific case, pandas, onto your own account. So I'm going to create the fork. And this might take just a little bit of time since pandas is quite big, but it wasn't as long as I expected. So as you can see that now I have a copies of the pandas repositories in my own account. If I were to make any change to their code, I could then say, hey, pandas, please do merge this code onto your repository. And I can then go to pull requests, create a pull request by new pull request. And as you can see here, it is going to compare what your repository is to the repository of pandas. There is currently 109 pull requests in the original pandas repository. And for example, we can see that, for example, let's click on this one. They found a bug and they are walking through what the bug is. They open the issue regarding this. And the more you scroll down, the more they tell about the bug itself. Once the bug is figured out, they create something called a merge. So they are merging a specific pull request. And right now, it seems like it's still ongoing. So pull requests are extremely useful when someone else is working on your code and they, for example, have something to say, or they have a merger to make, a merge of their code to make. Going back to our own little repository, let's look at the things that we can do. So let's talk a little bit about version control, and I'm going to go back to this image that we have in the page itself. Excuse me, version control over here allows you to add features over time. For example, feature A and then feature B, but maintaining the main branch alone. So as you can see here, the blue line is steady. Imagine that as being your main repository. And let's say that you want to add a new feature. You then create a new branch where you can add feature A. You can then merge your branch onto the main repository, or you can branch it once again to add a fix. And as you go along, you can then close this fix into merge this fix into what you can then call feature B, and then put it back into the main repository. Let's look at what creating a branch looks like. I'm going to go back to the data Tapas Git file, repository that we have. And for you to access branch, you can click this little button right here, branches, or this button right here next to branches, where you can see view all branches. I'm going to create a new branch. So I'm going to click on view all branches, and here on the right, excuse me, gives you the option to create a new branch. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a new branch. I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it branch 1. And you can see here that it can take the source from a number of different branches. And right now we're going to keep it from main. But if you have multiple branches, as we saw earlier, you can make the source from branch 1 or branch 2. So right now we get it from main. We're going to create a new branch. We're going to reload. And you can see that now we have a new branch. Fantastic. Great. This is exactly what we wanted. We go back to code. And if I click on branches, I can see now that there is a new branch. You can click on that. And here, let's say that I want to make a new file. I'm going to create a new file and say file from branch.md. Nothing much to see here, just a file from a branch. if I were to commit my changes, I'm just going to say create file from branch MD. I'm just going to commit that because that's exactly what we just did. And go back to our repository. It is going to tell you, hey, your branch _1 has recently pushed a new commit, and now there is changes somewhere else. There is changes in your branch. But these changes are not reflected in your main branch. So in order for us to bring the changes to the main branch, we'll have to create a pull request. Just to show you that if I do click on branch number 1, we do have that file from branch only within that branch number 1. From here, I'm going to create the pull request. So just click this compare and pull request button. And I'm going to add a title that say merging file from branch onto main. And here it's going to, we can choose to compare what branch to what branch. And on the left, we have main. This is the destination. And on the right, we have branch 1, which is the source. It is going to then go and make an automatic check, and it is going to say that it's able to merge. Likely, if this is more difficult topics, you will have to do manual checks. But since this is not a difficult topic, it is able to figure out that these are able to merge. So I'm going to create the pull request. As you can see now, we do have a single pull request number 1, and here is the merger where it is going to go and think, okay, can this be merged automatically? You can also add rules, such as this has to be seen by at least 2 people, or this requires your supervisor to you have their password. And for right now, we're just going to merge the pull request. Yeah, I just wanted to merge. Let me confirm it. Great, fantastic. Pull request was successfully merged and closed. I can then delete my branch if I'm not planning to go ahead and use it again. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And as you can see, it also gives you the possibility to restore. So nothing in GitHub is ever really lost. And if I were to go back to my code, I can see that now I have the file from branch.md. This is a small little exercise to show you, for example, that you can create branch. And in order for you to merge these branches onto your main, you can create a pull request. Okay, fantastic. We do have very little time to go and add some code locally. So how do we, I'll have to do a new share. So let me stop sharing. And I wanted to share at this point my entire desktop. Okay, so you should now be seeing my entire desktop where I have open the terminal. If you have never used a terminal before, this can be a little bit intimidating, especially if it's just a black screen. And this lesson does require a little bit of knowledge on SSH or command line interface, or this next part requires. But let me just explain to you what's going to happen. We're going to create a file, sorry, we're going to clone the repository onto our computer. We're going to create a number of changes, and we're going to push these changes back up. But before we do this, we need to connect Git and GitHub together. How do we do that? Well, we do that by something called secure shell. And secure shell is shortened to SSH. You can see whether your computer and the repository online are connected by doing SSH-T git at github.com. I'm going to copy and paste this onto the chat. And if I were to press enter right now, it's going to say, permission denied. We don't have your public key. Okay, no problem. How do I create a public key? Oh, excuse me just a second. How do I create my public key? In order for you to create an SSH key, you have to type in SSH-keygen, and this is going to generate the SSH key. -T, and -T is simply chooses what algorithm of encrypted key you want to use. And I want to use the ED25519 encryption, which is a new sort of encryption that is a lot more secure than your standard encryption type. And I'm going to say I want to add a comment, and that I do that with -C, and I'm going to say what my email is. That is the email associated with my GitHub account. So I'm going to press enter, and now it is going to ask me, okay, where do you want to park this key? Now, normally I would just say, just press enter, but I do already have a key under this name. So I'm going to actually cancel this, but if you follow the instructions online, so I'm just going to show you what it looks like. Oh, I have to scroll down a little bit. You create your SSH key, press enter, and then you press enter again until you get to something that looks like this. This means that you have successfully created your key. And I'm just going to cancel here. And in order for me to know what the key looks like, I'm just going to do ls-a SSH/, and I can see that I do have this key right here. I will then do, you will then need to do cat, and that is going to concatenate and show you what the key does, what the key contains, tilde slash dot SSH ID underscore ED 255, oh, excuse me, AD 2 EDE, oh my gosh, okay, .pub. And I'm not going to show you what it looks like, so I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. But what I would like you to do is to go ahead with this command, press enter, and then copy the output. And once you have copied that output, I'm going to do clear to clear up my my shell. And once you have copied this output, go to GitHub, and on the top right, click on your icon and go down to settings. In settings, you are then needing to click on SSH and GPG keys, and then click on new SSH key. Here you add a title such as M1 Air, that is the computer that I'm using. And here you paste your key. Once you've done that, click Add SSH key. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. So that I can go ahead and do that. It's asking me to authentify with Duo. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do the double authentication. And verify. Seems like it's okay. There we go. All right. And now I can go back and share. And here is my new key. So now that I have created my key, I can go back to the terminal and type in what I typed in before. So SSH-T git at github.com. If I were to press enter, hey, it recognizes that that is me. Fantastic. So now my local Git and my online repository are talking to one another. And the next thing that I can do is go back to my repository. So I can go to my account and click my repositories and go to data Tapas Git, where I can click on code, the big green button called code. And here I click SSH, where I can copy, go to my terminal and do git clone. And I'm going to paste here what I just copied. So what this is going to do is that it's going to create a local copy of your online repository. It says that I have permission denied. Let's see what happens if I do ls. And I do see that it's right there, so I'm not sure what it is complaining about. I'm going to change directory into the data tapas underscore git, and I am auto-completing by pressing tab. You should be able to do the same. And as you can see here, it is understanding that I am in the main branch. And if I were to do ls, which stands for list, it shows me all of the files that I've created so far. So here I can use a local, what do you call it? A local text editor such as Nano to create a new file. So I'm going to say Nano file from computer.md. Notice how I do not leave spaces, and just to say that if I do leave spaces, then 3 different files called file from computer will be created, and we don't want that. We want to have underscores here. So I'm gonna press enter, and it prompts us into Nano. And I'm just going to say, this is the file from the computer. I'm going to do Control and X to exit. And this is going to say save modified buffer. I'm going to say Y for yes. And yes, I would like to save to file underscore from underscore computer. And you can see now that main tells me something's wrong. Well, what is wrong? If I do git status, it says that there is a single file that's not being tracked. It's not being added to the commit. And when you're working with Git, there is a message. How do you get in to understand that you are in the main branch? I do not have the main check. Okay, that's a good question. What computer are you on? What OS are you on, Christopher? I currently am on Mac, Windows. Okay, so because you're on Windows, there are some discrepancies. But if you are on Mac, since it is Unix, there are some extensions that you can use. But if you're on Windows, there is different ways to see what branch you are on. And you can do, over here, you can do git status. I just did it right now, and it tells you on what branch you are. And apologies if things don't look exactly the same. But that's one way of seeing what branch you are on right now. What I was about to say, excuse me, we are a little bit over time, but when you're working on Git on your own machine, you want to do the following. You always want to do Git status. You always want to do Git pull. And these two commands are the ones that pull changes from the remote repository and also check on whether there are changes locally. Git pull will pull the changes from the remote repository, and Git status shows you what changes are currently on your computer. The next thing that you want to do is to do git add and then the name of the file or files that you have changed. In this specific case, file underscore. I'm not going to add more. I'm just going to press F and then press tab, and that should work without completing. And this is going to add my change to the commit. This is still giving me a warning. Please do ignore that. But what this does is that it adds a change to the commit. And that's something that you should get used to when working locally. You should add, commit, and push. So if I were to do git status now, git status, it says that, hey, in this commit, there is a new file. The commit has not been made yet, and that is the next step. In order for you to do the commit, you do git commit -m, and -m stands for message, adding files from local. You want to use -m because if you do not use -m, it prompts you into an editor, and the editor is a little bit hard to work with if you do not know Vim or VI. So it's always good to use -m, and then press enter, and it says here that you are adding files from local, and you have made a single change, which is a single insertion, and once you add and commit, you have to push. So you do git push and just press enter, and this should enumerate changes and pushing them onto the online repository. So now let's go back to our online repository where we can reload the page, and I can see that there is now a file from my computer. And this should just have a single line. Yes, okay. Okay, so apologies if that was a little bit rushed. It's very difficult to try to explain how to use Git and GitHub in just a single hour. But to go over what we did, I'm going to scroll all the way at the bottom over here. We were able to understand a little bit of the differences of Git and GitHub. We also learned a little bit about how to navigate the GitHub platform. And we talked about what the repository is, look at the history. We talked a little bit about forks. We even were able to create a pull request from a branch. And then we were able to connect the machine. So we were able to connect Git to GitHub and also push the changes from our computer to online. So with that in mind, thank you for being here for an extra 3 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing. But if you do have any questions, I'm here to answer anything that you might have. So thank you very much for being here, and your attendance is always appreciated. Actually, now that I think about it, I will the people back at the lab will yell at me if I don't show the the closing slides. So I will have to do a little quick share of this. And once again, if you should be able to see the screen. Thank you very much for being here today. Do check in with us, and thank you very much for your comments, folks. Yes, you will definitely do get a recording, And there is currently 6 different recordings per week. So we are currently working on getting the last week uploaded, but these are being uploaded and we are pushing onto a more steady uploads speed. Thank you very much, Brandon. Oh, there is a question here. One of the questions for you when done, when you made the branch, can you show again what interface you went to? Yes, okay. I can actually, this is relevant, so I'm going to keep on sharing and show you a little bit. Okay. Go over here and share screen onto here. Okay. Oop. Okay, Christopher, I see your question. So when you create a branch, you can either create a branch through view all branches or by clicking the branch button. So please do click the view all branches or the branch button, and here click the new branch. So again, I'm gonna call it branch 2 this time around. And here I click the new branch. So I just need to reload the page here. And I can see that there is a new branch. Is that what you were asking for, Christopher? Cool, fantastic. Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing and wish you guys the best of times. Thank you very much for being here.